Thank you, Ann. As all of you know on the team, Ann's the mover and the shaker and the information specialist, and she does not let me forget things. So that's great. Thank you. So this is recorded meeting on November 1st, so I can officially say happy holidays to everybody. All right, we just entered into November, so pretty spectacular. Boy, this year went by quick. It's amazing. But anyway, so for the last about a month and a half, I think we've had 3 meetings that we've had to kind of put on hiatus. And so we're back in the swing now. And the reason is very simple, is we just have a lot going on. We're all professionals, and usually in the construction business, when you get into, September, October, November, you're trying to beat the holiday season and things of that nature. So the industry gets busy. We're all industry folks. We also teach, many of us, universities. And but the other thing is that this is just turned out to be an enormous problem to dissect, understand, and tackle in a way that's meaningful. And so so that leads us to our next thing is for a quick update, is that we have a segment of the white paper complete. I'll kind of show you what it looks like. It's by Dr. Vishish Singh with UC Berkeley, just received his doctorate degree, by the way. Completed his paper a couple weeks ago, and we've been reviewing it. Looks very good, but it's 7 pages, and that's just one. Dr. Brad Hyatt is, we had a meeting this morning. His part of the paper is going to be due or done on Monday, and mine is slated to be complete on Wednesday. So the challenge is that our original direction from Jabu at Johns Hopkins Applied Lab was try to keep it around 10 pages. Maybe Steve, you mentioned, I think you had maybe chimed in on that as well, which totally agree, but it's going to be a challenge. And so, what I just right off the board, what I'd like to propose is that next Friday, potentially we have a meeting to just review the white paper draft. And we'll have it posted, but just to get questions and things like that, just to stir up interest. And the reason is I don't want to wait another 2 weeks before we go over the white paper, because it's taken quite a while. And again, if we were 100% researchers and theorists, it would have been done quite a bit faster. But again, this is a non-funded study, and everybody here on this meeting, we're all practitioners, which it keeps it very out of the too much out of the theoretical base and more into the actual application, which is really important for such a complex problem. We have to really make sure that it's the real something that can be applied in real life. So with that said, let me just kind of give you a hint of, and this will be, Ann, if you could, this is hot off the press, so maybe Ann, if you could post this to the data page. And knowing her, it'll be like posted. I think you have this paper, right?
Yeah.
From Dr. Vishish?
Oh, that I do.
Yeah, okay.
It's already on.
It's already there. Okay. And where is that located? And I'll show you what it looks like. Where is that located?
It's in the data room.
It's in
primary.
Okay, so this is in the data room under the primary. And this is Vishish's expertise. And I think this is where the needle threads through all the different expertise that's needed for this systemic process. And it's pretty comprehensive. And so this will give you kind of a flavor of what the graph is going to look like, what the paper, the essence of what's going on. Dr. Brad Hyatt writes in very much the same manner. His is more about how the estimate actually, after verification, how it reports, and it's his is more based on the business case, which again, Steve is addresses your comment, which kind of nudged us in a position or in a direction that I think is extremely relevant. And I think we would have been missing the boat if we didn't report back to the business case return on investment. So we're pretty excited about that. And so the next thing that will happen is we may not have the thread that ties all of these together. My part with the general theory, business case, and reporting code, how we code these things, the CSI or Omni or some using NASA's structure, by the way. But with the general theory, with the reporting and the verification, it may not have that red thread completely, but we'll have them posted on there so you can start perhaps just taking a gander through it, and then we'll have a structured way of how we report or how you can give input and that type of stuff. We won't just throw it out there and say, hey, give us input. We'll have some sort of a structure. And then just a reminder to the team, then we'll break out into expertise zones, and we'll come up with some sort of process for that. We don't think that this, for where we are right now, we don't think it's going to take much longer. Certainly not going to be 6 months. I'm thinking probably another 3 months maybe to get something that has legs and that can be poked and prodded and defended without being defensive, right? And let me see. The other thing then is, so we're excited about this. The other thing is the TV show. Is still going well. They've submitted a script. It came out last week, I believe. I owe them a meeting here well, it was supposed to be this week. I got to push it to next week. And I'll give you an update next Friday of their production schedule, which we're officially, that NASA and Johns Hopkins, NASA, the PR wing of NASA is waiting for the white paper to put their final step on it. So we can put the NASA logo on it. We can interview folks from NASA. Hint, hint, Steve. And NASA will be behind this officially. Same thing with Johns Hopkins. So we're that close. Again, we're just all waiting on the paper. So there's a lot of pressure on us to make sure that we're done. And critical path, I believe, is having this done next Friday. I'm going to pause there. And are there any questions before I move on to the fun part of our show today?
Yeah, hey, Paul, I have a question. Do you have a Space Act agreement with NASA that would cover this?
What type? Who is
a Space Act agreement? This is Steve Fair. So I was asking about if there's a Space Act agreement, because I didn't see any with UC Davis, but I wasn't sure if there was any that I just wasn't aware of.
What was that? A space what?
Space Act agreement. It's kind of a bilateral agreement for data sharing and some other stuff. It's more formal. We can do like a lot of collaboration without them. But if we start getting more in depth, then it kind of, our lawyers want us to do a formal Space Act agreement.
So I'm going to say yes, and here's why. Because I'm sure you know the name Stephen Robinson. He was on 4 shuttle missions and 80-hour spacewalk, whatever. He runs the NASA Habitat Lab here on NASA on campus. It's funded 100% by NASA.
Oh, okay. Fantastic.
Pretty good sized lab, actually. And so, and he has, I think, some of the he has 80 hours of spacewalk in, and he also was the main designer of the Coppola viewing window for this International Space Station. So I'm going to say I'm 99% sure we have that agreement in place with the university. And we do a lot of work. The aerospace department does a lot of work with NASA directly as well. So
okay, thanks. I'll see if I can track that down and then make sure the wording covers. So,
yeah, right, and then maybe Ann, we can talk to the department and maybe get a copy of it as well. So thanks. I didn't realize that was a thing. So thanks, Steve. Appreciate it. Okay, well, I'd like to introduce students that have joined us today. And last week, or the week before last, we had a delegate from South Korea, and Anne, who's going to go first in the presentation? You're going to go first? Okay. Anne, what I'd like you to do is maybe sit in the captain's chair and talk about who we had, who visited, what was their purpose, what was the outcome, what was the reason, and then we'll switch seats, and then Matthew, you go. And so I am very proud of these students. They are all seniors. They're in the engineering department. I'll have them talk a little bit about themselves. They're going to say what department you're on in, your experience in 10 seconds or less on being on the study group. Two of them, this is their second quarter. We do quarters here, not semesters. And they're going to be doing another two after this. So they're very dedicated in this subject of estimating moon construction. There literally will be on supervised study almost a year, solid year, pretty much. So so that's a tremendous commitment. They get credit for it. We have some experts here in the department. One is an expert in moon reglet. Another gentleman is expert in construction material for lunar surface construction, things of that nature. So they get a lot of input. I'm one of their main primary instructors for this. It's independent study, so I really dive into to them understanding what they're doing. It's not what, just so you know, understand when you hear them talk, they're not talking about what they're not doing observation. It's not only what, but they're diving into the why. And then once they get into the why, then we understand what they understand, and then we can flower that even further. So they are pushed very hard mentally, and you'll see by the presentation. And so without further ado, we're very proud of them, and let's go ahead. Anne, if you can come over here. What's that?
Oh, I'm sharing it already.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Okay.
So you're gonna go, you're gonna talk there or here?
I'm gonna do it here.
Okay.
It's just easier, so we're not.
Perfect.
See.
All right. So Anne, tag, you're it.
Okay, hi everyone.
Uh-oh, let me put my thing on mute. Because okay. Oh,
Yeah, I'll do it in your chair.
There.
That's fine. That's fine. Technical difficulties.
I just put the mute button.
Let me get this one out of the way. Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Anne. I'm the information specialist intern for Paul, and I'm helping coordinate everything for the study. Really quick before we get into anything, I put two different links in the chat. If you look at it, there's both the link to Dr. Vishish's paper, but also the Lens of Expertise form. It'll just take a minute. Please fill it out. It will make our process for figuring out the peer review for the white paper a lot easier. It'll take a minute. Some of you have done it, some of it you haven't, and that's okay. I don't think Paul's done it yet either, but hopefully we can get that all settled by next week. Okay. Yeah, last week we had two visiting professors from South Korea, and one of the professors is looking at tensegrity structures for building on the moon, while the other professor was specializing in designing materials for both in situ resources on the moon and also on Mars. So we were really excited to get to share some of our studies and also to hear about their research as well. Yeah, I guess to start off, Matthew's going to start.
Now, if I may, just walk over here so they can hear me. If I may, you can go ahead. So Matthew, I'm gonna just ask a couple questions. So what department are you with?
I'm in the managerial econ department here at UC Davis. and I'm an undergraduate, 4th year here, as Paul has said.
And what brought you to the NASA or the estimating on the moon group?
I was brought on because a position opened up in the field of exploring the risk assessment and return on investment side for this entire project. And that's what I've been brought on to study and learn and to see the ways that we could develop and further look into that side of a complex project like this.
Now, and I'm gonna embarrass you a little bit because I want you to know something. So when we were thinking of venting a student, I talked to the department advisor. He's one of the top students in their department. So just I think that's important to note. Now, I'm going to introduce you to Steve later on. Steve, do you want to introduce yourself and?
Hi, yeah, I'm Dr. Steve Fair from NASA Langley Research Center. I am our Center Transformation Portfolio Manager. And, among my other credentials, I taught some classes in engineering economics. So, had some understanding of the principles and everything here, even though I'm more primarily technical. And yeah, no, don't want to go too deep off the rails there, but yeah, seeing lots of problems here as well with the economic models as well as the technical hurdles that it's going to take to do everything for lunar exploration. So.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And the reason I thought it was important also for you to introduce yourself is I keep talking about you because he is the reason, you are the reason that Mathew's here, which was to dive into the business side of reporting and estimating. And so I'm excited that maybe you guys will be able to share some, that you can spread some of your knowledge with Mathew and the team. So that's great. Without further ado, Mathew, tag your ed and go man go.
Thank you. So yeah, so the first part is the risk assessment side of it. And in order to do that effectively, we're going to have to be able to categorize the fundamental components of this project into manageable sections. And how we're going to be able to do that is we're taking NASA's work breakdown structure, as you can see it has 7 levels, and we're using that as a base in order to categorize the components of this project and in order to be able to accurately track them as well throughout the entire project. On the right-hand side, you'll also be able to see certain coding formats that we will take inspiration from. We are not using any of these coding formats directly. These are just inspirations that we're taking from in order to add to the work breakdown structure in order to kind of better categorize the components of it. Uni format and master format are more pre-construction related, and American Standard Code for Information Interchange is just more of a general coding format that we are taking inspiration from. An important thing to note is why we are using the NASA work breakdown structure and not necessarily making a new one in our making a new one for this project. And that's because NASA has a wealth of previous knowledge that we would like to use, and by fundamentally changing their coding structure and their work breakdown structure, we could run the risk of not being able to integrate that properly or being able to use some of that critical knowledge that we would be able to use for a project like this. And any previous knowledge that we can use, it would be very effective for us to be able to use that. Another emphasis I would like to put on the work breakdown structure is, although it has 7 here, we would like to have infinite, or we would like to emphasize the fact that there are like infinite levels in between each one. So we could use the coding structure in order to break it down even further into the components that we need for this project, and we aren't necessarily limited to the 7 levels here. We are just adding to this work breakdown structure.
And how many levels? Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were done. Go ahead.
Yeah. So here as well, we have the general theory for this entire project. What I would like to emphasize here is the the both direction timeline. So what that means is as time moves forward, we are both making predictions on what we think will happen within the project. And once those time instances occur, we are able to also look back on previous predictions that we have made in order to adjust them, adapt them, and to make them better and use the new information that we get to better inform our future predictions and information. That's what the subjective, objective, predictive analysis represents in the bottom left there. It's just as time moves forward, we are able to better, more things become objective as more things have occurred, and we are able to use that objective information to better inform our future and our future information. Yes, and so to iterate on the second part of the return on investment, we are still developing a way of understanding what that would look like for a project like this, and like how we would be able to, let's say, break that down or formulate that into a more concrete number or something that could represent an accurate depiction of what the return on investment would look like. So we are still at the beginning of stages of that, and we don't have necessarily any examples of that, but we are working on how to develop something that would show that aspect.
All right, very good. Thank you, bud. Thank you. Let's do this. Are there any questions? We'll probably, as we switch speakers, let's go ahead and give them hard questions. They're used to me poking at them quite hard, and it's healthy, gets their brain ticking. So are there any? Don't hold back. Be as theoretical as you want. Are there any questions for the first part?
I do have a question.
Yes.
This is Patrick Duke. So, in terms of the work that NASA has done in space, it could be spacewalks or experiments on the space station, etc. What have we learned in terms of any kind of benchmarking that could even possibly be useful for the work effort that we're going to do?
So I'm not necessarily aware of any previous knowledge that we have or specific examples of previous experience that we have done. But for many of the things that need to occur on the moon for moon construction, that the environment that, let's say, the International Space Station has is a very important component for us to be able to conduct experiments and to see like what the environment could look like on the moon. Obviously, I don't think we have a exact replica per se, but by being able to conduct these experiments in outer space within like an environment that is not the Earth, we are able to better use that information to inform what it would potentially look like on the moon.
Hey, Patrick,
Yes,
just real quick, good question. Can you give me the elevator speech of your question? Because I was talking to Anne. And
yes,
I
sir.
make sure
So we have been going into space for a long, long time. We've not built any structure on a planet or a moon at this point in time, but we have landed on them. We've explored them. We've done spacewalks there. So I'm wondering, is there any knowledge to gain in terms of benchmarking productivity rates and any of that stuff? And it seems to me, too, the second part of my question is, are we planning to use robotics to do all the major work with humans controlling them, given the challenges with the environment up there?
Yeah. So very good questions. And now remember, William is a Matthew. I do that all the time. Matthew is a economics major. So if you can imagine that, doing such a great job and not being in construction. Patrick, just very quickly, yes, there is each astronaut's, we think, around $2 million a day, and that's substantial. And so the robotic side is, think about this. We have not really have performed construction on the moon. We've deployed things, we've put pipes together and whatever. That's just putting two pieces together, or, I'm simplifying, of course, but not really foundation, launch and, takeoff or landing and launch pads that have a tremendous amount of force, touching it and on with, and really dealing with moon ringlet that has lots of static charge that's going to really mess things up. I'm reminded this is a long about answer. I'll come to conclusion here pretty soon, but I'm reminded at the LISIC, or the Johns Hopkins spring session they had back in Baltimore last April. They had Caterpillar there, and very well known in the industry. And he brought up a point, or maybe it was a university in Canada. But at any rate, he brought up a very good point, which is you take your best technology right now for automation on excavation tractors. And with today's technology, you only get about 60 hours before they break down. Now think about that, right? So who's gonna, if it's autonomous vehicles or apparatus, who's gonna fix that? So these type of things are, are experimental. That's why it's so important. We feel, the research team thinks it's so important to get the coding correct. So as we do these small segments and we have this instant verification, we can predict what, use these little these little things. What did we predict the production was going to be? And so then it can recalculate probabilities for the next one as they get bigger and bigger, because time is of the essence. And I'm reminded Dr. Stephen Robinson, who's did spacewalks. He said you would go into the buoyancy tank and you rehearse and rehearse and rehearse and rehearse, and they would throw all these simulations at you, and the one that always got them. And the more risk they thought they were going to have, they would do more simulations. He said usually what would happen, invariably, every spacewalk he did, the things that you thought were really going to go wrong were perfect, and the things you didn't think were going to go wrong, they didn't throw enough simulations at you, that's where they went wrong. And so you had to think on your feet. So it's experimentation. The important thing, though, is to have a unified way that the estimate can flow, that as soon as we learn what the production potentially is, it's fed back to the beginning so it gets smarter, and there's none of this. So you talk about historical information. This is historical information on steroids, concentrate. So thank you, Patrick. Great question. Jackson?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to add a quick bit to Patrick's question. I think we're seeing a fundamental change. A lot of the history of space exploration the ROI is difficult because we're spending money. We can compare different cost models and different proposals, but our return on investment, we're getting knowledge back. Or other very difficult to really kind of put in a tangible value to. Whereas we are seeing this shift to a lunar economy and to this world where now there is an actual potential dollar return on investment. And that is a fundamentally different problem economically that I'm not aware of much precedent for, as far as research and figures and papers published on it. Not to say they don't exist, but I haven't seen them yet. And that was part of my question. I approached you was, what is the value of innovation? How do we calculate that ROI for just innovative early stage research?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, thank you, Steve. That added a lot. Jackson.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of tied into my question. Like, we're looking at ROI. So what's the return I guess that was my sort of, besides the innovation part, are there other things like resources on the moon that might be valuable to bring in more investment? So I wasn't sure if that was something that anybody has explored from previous, moonwalks or whatever that's been done.
Stefan, I'm gonna do a superficial, but if you want to chime in, because you probably know a lot more internal aspect of that. And I'll give you a couple examples. Helium-3 is very rare on Earth, but it's not rare on the moon. Number one, water, converting hydrogen fuel out of the water, separating oxygen and hydrogen. And also there's a lot of alloys on the moon. And so they're expecting to do a lot of excavation. And so NASA has like a 15-year plan or so, and they want to, as Steve mentioned, they do want to eventually, I think within 10 years, have a sustainable lunar economy. So good question. Steve, did I mess up anything there, or is that your understanding as well?
Oh, yeah, that tracks.
Okay, good. All right. Well, let's go ahead in the interest of time. Are there any more questions before we move to our next student? And okay, and who's next? All right, introduce yourself. Ashiq is senior, and he's in the civil engineering department, and he's taken the estimating analysis class, which it takes a lot of your time, so we're proud of them. And go ahead and go. You're next.
Hello everyone. Ashiq.
Convey what you're okay.
Hello everyone. I'm Ashiq. I'm a fourth year civil engineering major. I got to this research through Professor Martin's construction estimating class, and I had some prior experience of doing estimating from a general contractor as well. So that kind of led me to here. But with this research, I've been mostly kind of focusing on the means and methods and kind of learning the ways of the estimating structure for the moon construction. So if you look at it, we have the master estimate, which gets broken down into smaller estimates. In terrestrial construction, we can see this as an estimate which gets broken down into trades, where we do estimates for every particular trade, and they could all get added up to a total estimate. But looking into a meeting that we had a few weeks ago, where instead of looking at every trade, we're trying to look at it as a system, where a system is composed of objective and subjective events, where we brought up the example of a screw, which connects to a HVAC unit, compared to an Earth and also for moon construction, where if you look at every event, in the beginning of it, we're going to have more things that are subjective than they're objective, where objective will be the things that we know and we can measure, where subjective will be more of opinions and probabilities that we're trying to fill in the gaps to create a complete estimate. And as time passes by, as you can see by the delineation of the arrows, the subjectiveness will slowly go down, where the probability will near zero, but will not achieve zero until the event has actually occurred. So this is the point where it turns from subjective to objective, where it achieves lock state. And by the graph that you see in the bottom right corner, that is the ratio of objective and subjectiveness, where at the beginning we have more things that are subjective, and as time goes on, it's more of a curve and not linear, where we'll see more things that are objective than they are subjective. And that will depend on the events that are happening and the schedule that will be planned for these missions. The cube that you see up there, the cube that you see up there in the image, that is the cube of relevancy. So when one event actually occurs, it goes through this backflow where it verifies any other event that this particular event is related to, where It's gonna make sure that there's little to no variance in the estimate through making sure that anything that is relevant to that particular event that became objective is also on the path that it is supposed to be. And moving on, this is to highlight more of the timeline of the mission, where we will have different stages for construction. And these stages will delineate like a life cycle, whether it's for materials or whether it's for just the process of kind of starting from sourcing till demolition or recycle. And all these events that kind of mentioned within the system, they will occur at different parts of these stages, and it will kind of go through this backflow and verification process to make sure that the estimate is on track and there's low to no variance. And yeah, this is something that we've been kind of learning through Professor Martin, and kind of the understanding of means and methods on how construction will occur according to this estimating structure. Thank you.
All right, so are there any questions for Ashiq? Wants to jump in and fire out a question.
I just want to make a comment that I am very average when it comes to intelligence, and I have no clue what all this is, but I'm sure you guys do. And one day I can come to California and you can give me the tutorial.
Patrick,
But I love
you're not.
I love
You're also a very humble man.
No, I love this. I mean, I'm sitting here and thinking back when I was a student, and like,
Yeah, I'm
man,
very proud of
this
him.
really, really good thinking from the team, and I'm enjoying each of these. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. That's a compliment coming from Patrick. He's known in the industry. So
Thank you. Thank you.
we're very proud. But if you can see, we're pushing the students to move beyond the norm, and it's a thinking experiment. And then we always throttle back and say, okay, well, how is that going to apply to? Because we're all the people they work with we're also practitioners. So we'll always push back to say, okay, now how do we make it apply in real life? And so it's been a treat. I'm blessed to be associated with them as these students as well. All right.
One final question I have for Steve, real quick.
Yeah,
Steve, do you guys still give some sort of creativity test like George Land used to give, and he did his experiment at NASA on, how do we identify those who can think differently as these students are being challenged to do? Do you guys still have some sort of aptitude test of that nature?
Not that I've seen, but I'm not aware of all of our processes. Usually these days we go through USA Jobs for most of our hires, and there's other forms for bringing in interns. But it's an interesting question. I actually have not heard anything on that. I'm gonna. Oh, just leave
George
it at
Land,
that.
George Land was a world-renowned researcher, worked with NASA back in the late 60s. I think he died in 2012, but that was what he was doing, is helping to bring in the most creative people we had in the country.
Yeah, there's certainly a great mix of people of all different types, people who think all different ways. It's a great place to work for.
Great. All right. Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate it. Steve, thanks for your input. And Ann, you're next. And just, most people know Ann. She's the information specialist. She's been in the estimating analysis class. This is her third quarter.
Yep.
Or third quarter on the NASA problem. And she'll also be next quarter as well, and the quarter after that. And also she's interning for the Institute. You're on your second quarter of that, right?
Yes.
So she's pretty engaged, and she carries a full load as well. So these are all exceptional individuals, and take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. So my focus of the theory is looking at how to account for estimating for technology that has not been invented. And that's something that is very loaded when you say it up front, but I think we'll be able to break it down and hopefully clarify that a little bit. So there's a lot of exciting technology that's being developed, and these are just some of the images that have been generated for what the lunar base could look like. But to go more into the theory, continuing on from what Ashiq was talking about earlier, the master estimate is the center of everything. It should contain everything that is relevant to the project. And when you look at it, it breaks down into various lenses of expertise. And these cluster groups are so important. And each cluster group is also divided into its own groups. So like Ashiq mentioned in terrestrial construction, typically they're broken up by trade, and that's something that is going to occur for lunar construction as well. But master estimate is so full encompassing that in order to divide it into all these sections, you can think of them kind of as off ramps. So like the lenses of expertise form, this is a plug for everyone to fill that out. You have a main road that's going down, and that's just like the theory that we're looking at. But the theory is so over encompassing, and we need to think about all the various sectors that go into it. And you have these off ramps and on ramps, but they're all going down the same path. But when you think about it, in a way, they kind of loop back as well because it's constantly feeding into each other. But something that this diagram doesn't show is that each of these trades needs to have full understanding between them as well. So thinking everything as full encompassing, each lens of expertise should not only be focusing on their knowledge, but also be fully communicating to the others as well. And thinking of that, currently 98% of mega projects run over budget, and that is done by the McKinley study, forget the exact name. Yeah. And that's only for construction on Earth. When we're thinking about constructing on the moon, the risk, the time, the finances, everything is blown to a massive scale. So that is something that really needs to be focused on. And typically, estimators are not brought in until the end of the project, or not end, but when the plan is complete, such as, you know, the buildings are complete and they do take off and plan for the budget and all of that. But something that this theory is really focused on is involving estimators at a sooner time in the project. So having them being able to determine what information is relevant earlier on, especially with technology that's still being developed, we can understand both the time and the production and the finances that go into it at an earlier point rather than later. And that's something that's really important for making sure that things are running on time and they're not going over budget. And something that's going to be very crucial to that, that's being tracked, is the technology that's going to be tracking that. And one of the papers that we have been reviewing by Dr. Figueroa is his paper on model-based systems engineering. And he's also with NASA, and continuing that title, Real-Time Operations and Autonomy, something you can find in the data room under primary reading. This system is something that's very complex and not something I'm going to dive into, but that's something that we're really looking at for being able to track all of this real-time information and being able to look at that. And these are the 13 categories that we have landed on for the white paper. And that's something that we're hoping to look at as off-ramps, thinking of it when you're looking at the highway, right? You go, they all split off to different branches. And that's something later on to, after the white paper is published, we'll be able to have many separate papers that dive into each of these topics. And that's also just to make sure that the paper is not too long and that people are able to stay engaged and also be able to focus on whatever their interest and specific needs are. But these are the lenses that we've looked at for the lenses of expertise, and they really just all have such an important part to the main theory and also the master estimate. This is something that really needs to be stressed, is that each lens should not only be focusing on itself, but all tying into one another and really having understanding of their connection points. Yeah.
Very good. All right. So any questions for Ann? We've got about 6 minutes left, so we're right on time.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a question for Ann, but her kind of comments did raise a question. I'm not an academic, right? I'm a practical person. Spend a lot of time in the institutional world, a lot of capital program type projects, university based, hospital system based.
Sure.
And one of the, particularly as it relates to your task, and in trying to analyze or develop strategies for technology that might not yet exist. One of the biggest challenges I see in the real world is overcoming contracting and procurement hurdles. And I'm wondering how, I'm assuming first off that NASA has their own hurdles. And I'm wondering how those hurdles might impact, things that I would typically try and push, but sometimes get resistant, like, design assist or design build and other types of delivery methods outside of a typical, design bid build type procurement method.
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and Steve, you could probably chime up on this if you see a window here, but I think there's something to remember. Even the most sophisticated lean construction contract right now is a IFOA, integrated form of delivery. And if you think about that, that's really a behavioral contract. And so, and I think that we get stuck on earth construction, we get stuck on contract, we do the same thing over and over and over, and we get the same results, and people will fall into these pushing risk downstream. And I would suspect that once you even get elevated into a scenario where you're working directly with NASA or a subsidiary that, whether it's SpaceX or whatever it is, not a subsidiary of NASA, but wherever you are in the chain, that when you're working on these very complex problems, I think what I've kind of sensed is that there's an awareness of the complexity and how we do have to think out of the box. And I would suspect that it may even be a little easier to come up with some contractual understanding because of the enormity and the complexity of what we're dealing with. I think it's what I'm seeing when I go to these seminars and when I speak at conferences on this subject matter. There's where usually I do these conferences in the construction estimating, in hospitals typically. And there's more of a rigid structure of thought. And Richard, I know Patrick, you're going to chime up on here. The thought process is more rigid, but as soon as you break into NASA and where that's synonymous with the name of explore, think beyond, progress the human journey. And I'm not sure what their official message is, but I'm just saying that's kind of the normal thought when you hear that. And the problem that we're trying to solve, it's amazing to see the shift of the mind move into an open-minded realm. And there's no normality that we typically have to confine ourselves to. So I think it's actually going to be easier than we think. Of course, contract, of course. But I think we probably won't have the same restraints because it's so new, it's so different that people are willing, if they're going to play in that swim lane, they won't make it to the next step if they think in a rigid structure. They have to think in an agile structure. Patrick, this is right down your alley. What's your thought?
Yeah, no, I think that kind of collaboration and environment, it's almost like when Steve Jobs said, let's build the Macintosh and put a building separate from everybody else with a pirate flag and co-locate everybody and get it done. I mean, I think that absolutely has to happen. I mean, I know I hate to go here. There's various reasons of Boeing's, but remember how Boeing, they tried to pull all these pieces and parts from various factories and then put it together. That didn't work so well. And maybe that from a cost standpoint, that was right, or et cetera. But I think this has to be done with a dedicated group together with real incentives and outcomes, and certain people maybe put skin in the game when it comes to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna add, first of all, Anne, great presentation, all of the students, thank you. This has, really been great to see how you've pulled this information together. And, having studied with Paul before and worked with him, I'm familiar with a lot of the concepts that you were talking about, but how you're talking about moving them forward, I think is really interesting, and it'd be great to see where it goes. But Scott, I think that was a really good question, because I do a lot of federal work too, and it's, there are a lot of constraints when you get into the procurement world of, and so I think for this to be successful, it's going to have to be something different, but addressing those procurement hurdles before, or early on is going to be important, or, things will get too far down the road and then run into difficulties, or I think that's something that really needs to be thought of from the beginning.
Yeah, you know what, just from hearing you talk, the question, Patrick, and then your follow-up, Jennifer, it's solid in my mind. We have to address it at some point. Because if these type of things, you could go brilliantly down path, and then the most fundamental basics of behavior and risk contractually aren't figured out. So Scott, thanks.
Yeah.
I guess it can derail the whole thing, can it? Yeah, you're right. So that was a good safety tip.
Yeah, and to add a little more, and then I do have a question if we have time. Yeah, I mean, NASA, we have a number of different contract vehicles, different contract methods available, but it always, I mean, NASA, like any government organization, like any organization, really, it's it's two-part, and there's always risk in there, both for the contractor and the contractee, and trying to balance that. I know a lot of my colleagues love firm fixed price because it eliminates a lot of the risk for us. We have one cost and we don't have to worry further, but that pushes all the risk to the contractor, and it's often difficult to bid. There are other different problems with all the different contract vehicles, and selecting the right one for a project to get the right teams and the right balance of risk is a big challenge. And I think it would be very appropriate to make those sort of recommendations if in the process of developing the white paper you see that some contract vehicles are going to work, some won't. Feel free to put that in there, because that's something that helps people make decisions.
Well, Steve, to follow up, I think, and Ann, I think we should actually have a lane, an off-ramp on expertise that's contract.
Yeah.
And that's something that we just completely didn't even think about. That's why these meetings are so important, and this open dialogue. Scott, it started with your question. What started with Ann's presentation. Scott, you brought up something fits into what Steve thought about earlier, much earlier on. Patrick, you followed up, and then Jennifer, you wrapped it up nicely, and and it really was something that's profound that we have to think about. So thank you. That's great.
Yeah, and like I say, I saw a quote in the news this morning from Boeing in relation to Starliner, which probably aware of has been having some challenges. I believe a Boeing exec said something to the effect of they won't bid on another NASA firm fixed price contract.
Oh, wow.
And I don't want to, I'm not 100% sure I got that quote right. So, but
we get the flavor.
Well,
yes. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
I mean, we could talk about this for a long time. I mean, there's not much appetite, in the contracting or construction community to do any firm fixed price work anymore. I mean, that's why, so your top left IPD square, that's kind of what caught my eye and made me thinking about this as well when Scott asked his question is, maybe that square isn't just IPD, but it's more about the, how do you contract or procure something like this, or what are,
And Jennifer, when we put that IPD together, we were thinking about using complex hospitals like IFOA hospitals as a model for that. So, maybe we didn't think deep enough. And maybe that's where it lives, is in the IPD model, which is behavior is structured via contract, right.
Yeah, I mean, the government has IDAC, but that's more like CMAR
Right.
in some ways. And I don't know if there's a true IPD model, in the
Yeah.
system somewhere, but
I'm actually excited that we would put, I mean, what a 101 question that we should address. What is the contracting method? Wow, yeah, this is great. Jackson, you've had your hand up for quite some time. I want to make sure that you had an opportunity to talk.
I guess one of the things that I was had a question on, as far as talking about technologies, are we going to engage also with, I mean, obviously we have a lot of construction professionals involved in this, but when we talk about expanding it into new technologies, are we going to engage other industries that might be in like robotics or AI, or
Yes.
to bring that in?
Yeah, we will. And can I take this one, Ann? And the reason is because we're running late, and it's a good question. So the answer is yes, it's just timing. And I'll give you an example. When the team from one of the universities out of Seoul, Korea, their expertise is in moon construction. They're developing new technologies and what have you, but they're developing new technology. And so our collaboration between Davis and them will be, how do we embed ourselves and understand what their need is and expectation of what type of reporting they need, and how do we finish the story? How do we take segmented parts of a technology and understand what their end game is, and fill in the middle section, so we can start that right away. And if we're not embedded, when I say we, the process of estimating is not embedded at the very, very beginning, it's going to be very difficult to catch up when the technology comes a little further down the line. So it's, typically these research groups, or these R&D groups, or research development, or whatever they're testing on technology, they typically aren't estimating groups, and they may not understand. They may understand what they want to know, or what they want to track, or where or where the end game is. They may understand that, but they may not understand how do we comprise a process that we can understand and track all of the components through the entire design development, through implementation. So to answer your question is, when you go back, can you go real quick, and then we're going to call it quits here in just another 2 minutes. We're going to end it at exactly 2:10. My apologies that we're running a little over, but this was brilliant today, not only from the students, but the questions. Go where the symmetry right there. If you notice that the master estimate is a typical, consider this being a complex hospital, right? And IPD, and your master estimate is, let's say, the GC, general contractor's estimate. In this case, it would be NASA's, right? And all of those side little flower cluster groups, maybe one is the habitat, one is maybe communication grid, infrastructure, electrical, mechanical system, on, and how they all have to meet together. But each of those are going to have their little estimates, and on. And it's irrelevant if it doesn't fit seamlessly into the master estimate. We can't have 1,000 different estimates doing their own thing, because then we lose that symmetrical, or that symmetry, where we don't understand where that information is flowing. And if if we start with, think of end game first, like a poll session, production is X, and you can have 1,000 different lists of things that they have to track in production. But if it can't track to the very beginning, then we lose a tremendous amount of reality capture and understanding of where things are. So think of it in that term. So hopefully I answered your question a little bit. I'd like to thank the students, everyone that came. Let's give jazz hands and clapping and all that stuff to the students. Thank you. I'm very proud of them. They really stepped up to the plate. I talked to them last night and said, guys, guess what? You're going to be doing a presentation today. And I didn't get anything. It wasn't like, oh no, it was like, hey, we're there. This was a presentation they did last week for our South Korean colleagues, and they did a marvelous job then also. Thank you so much for joining us, and is that something we need to?
I think we should address Jennifer's question.
Okay, Jennifer, you had a question. Let's address that real quick.
Oh, I just, I was trying to fill out the survey here but was wondering, when is the peer review going to take place? Just to gauge availability.
Let me see. Our goal is to have a draft of the draft next week. And then, just kidding, the draft next week. And then I think the peer review will probably be maybe a 3-week process, if I had to guess. Maybe more. Was that your question, Jennifer? Or
yeah, just trying to understand when you were looking for us to be able to review stuff, because
I would say from next week on. You can start by Dr. Vishish Sign's paper. That's going to be a section of it. I mean, you can start reading that. I think, Jennifer, to answer your question specifically, is we want to come up with a structure before we just say, here's the paper, go do your review. We want to put some sort of a structure together of how do you review it? How do you give input? That type of thing.
Okay.
And
Yep.
we plan to have that by next week as well. So
Yeah, and once we have that finalized, we'll reach out with an email and the process of how to do that.
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for filling out the form. That really helps.
I'm working on it. Okay.
Yeah, and I just realized, Jennifer, we didn't hit cycle jumps, but next time we will. She's an expert.
Okay.
So, all right, awesome, everyone. Steve, great. I'm so glad you showed up. It's always great to hear your input, and it's amazing. Patrick, Jennifer, Jackson, and Scott, and everyone else that chimed in. You guys are great. Oh, Keith Stout, excuse me. Keith Stout is he's with the U.S. Air Force. He does budgeting also for Space Force, and Keith is a graduate from UC Davis. So what's your impression of these outstanding students, Keith? Great musician, trumpet player, by the way.
Oh, they did an excellent job. Really appreciate all their passion and in-depthness. And I think the Air Force would be a good career move.
There you go. There's the plug right there. So
not if we don't get them in NASA first.
What'd you
But
say?
yeah, great presentations. Great job so far. Glad I was able to tune in, and looking forward to seeing your work progressing. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. It's a Friday. All right, thank you.
Everyone.
Great group to have them present to, by the way, too. Thank you. All right.